Janice Daniels is currently a co-host in the early morning conservative radio talk show called ART, Art of Michigan. It's on 7 to 8 a.m. on Wham Talk Radio 1600 a.m. She's also a guest hostess sitting in for Pastor Levon Ewell on the Christian radio talk show Joshua's Trail. This is heard every Saturday morning from 8 to 10 on WDTK AM The Patriot. Janice served as the 9th mayor of Troy. And she was the target of a vicious campaign to remove her from office simply because she stood up for biblical principles and she voted the way that she had campaigned. Janice, the dedicated citizen activist, is back. And she is here today to share her project to hold our public servants accountable. Constituent Guidelines for Effective Constitutional Government. Welcome, Janice.
I don't know what to do with that. Thank you. Thank you so much for braving the cold and joining us here today. I want to thank the Bloomfield Republican Women's Club for giving me this invitation. I'm honored to be speaking to you. My project, my newest project, is called Constituent Guidelines for Effective Constitutional Government. And what that means is that you and I, as constituents, are going to provide written guidelines to our public servants to make sure that they are effectively governing according to constitutional principles. Because I have a feeling that many of them do not understand the concept of rightful liberty. Thomas Jefferson defined rightful liberty as unobstructed action constrained only by the equal rights of others. In other words, we don't need a law to tell us that we shouldn't murder. We don't need a law to tell us that we shouldn't steal. Thomas Jefferson did not add in his definition of rightful liberty that it's constrained by the law, because he understood that the law is oftentimes nothing more than the tyrant's will. And if it violates the individual rights, it is always the tyrant's will. I know I'm not telling anybody in this room that we have problems in this country with our government. One of the problems that I see is that campaign promises are routinely broken. You and I all know we get glossy, wonderful campaign literature every election cycle, beautiful pictures, great statements. I'm going to fix Washington. I'm going to control climate change. I'm going to stop amnesty. I'm never going to raise your taxes. And you know, I know that we all look at these pieces of literature and quite frankly roll our eyes, throw them in the garbage, and then the person gets elected into office and they do the exact opposite of what they say they're going to do. It's very discouraging. Public servants don't seem to understand that they are subordinate to the people. I liked when Chris Ann Hall was in town and she said, actually, our public servants should clap when we walk into the room instead of the other way around. And you know, I think that it's time that we use the technology that we have available to us to hold our public servants accountable to their words and their deeds. For example, the first thing that a public servant does is they take the oath of office. This is their words. The first part of that oath of office is, I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, an enemy of the Constitution can be a number of different things. One, obviously, terrorists or people who don't like our way of life and they want to hurt us. Another enemy of the Constitution is the written word. The last part of the oath of office that our public officials take says, so help me God. Those are powerful words. And if a public servant doesn't abide by their oath, doesn't hold allegiance to their oath 100%, then they are breaching their oath. It is not a variation. There is no percentages. You can't 80% abide by your oath of office. It is 100% or nothing. And if a public official breaches their oath of office, it is the duty of you and I to either bend them into conformity or remove them from office. I think Thomas Edison said it nicely when he said, we shall have no better conditions in the future if we're satisfied with what we have at the present. And I want to give you an example of what we have at the present. The House recently passed a spending bill to fund the Department of Homeland Security. Now, you and I could get into a discussion about whether or not the Department of Homeland Security is constitutional in and of itself, but that's not a part of our discussion today. The fact is, the House passed the bill. It's a $40 billion spending bill that the Republican majority was very proud of passing because it had some amendments attached to it. The most significant one was the Aderholt Amendment that was supposed to defund the immigration piece of the bill. Well, what is the Aderholt Amendment? If you go online and try to find out what the Aderholt Amendment is, you'll have a very difficult time because there doesn't seem to be the text of it available. There are summaries, and of course the summaries say all the right things. This is to defund immigration, etc. But I found that it is a summary, actually, of a section of a larger bill that's in a committee right now called H.R. 191 that was sponsored by Representative Aderholt. House Resolution 191 is 44 pages of legalese that starts out giving the Secretary of Homeland Security sole discretion to determine on a case-by-case basis whether an alien should be allowed to stay in our country for a whole host of reasons: humanitarian, familial, medical. Now, where in the Constitution does it say that an unelected person singularly has the right to determine if a person who has broken the law to even be here should be allowed to stay here based on her sole discretion? That is not constitutional. I don't think you'll find that anywhere in the Constitution. And that's the kind of thing that gets me really upset, really passionate. The H.R. 191 also contains, and I counted them, 30 amendments to various other pieces of legislation, such as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. So right now, our legislators are working on legislation that amends legislation that was written 50 years ago. It also amends the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968, the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996. I don't know where they even come up with these names. The Homeland Security Act of 2003, the William Wilberforce Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008. You know, say that 3 times in a row real fast. And the famous Patient Protection and Affordability Care Act of 2011. Even the names of these pieces of legislation sound like they're straight out of Atlas Shrugged. And if you haven't read Atlas Shrugged, I would highly recommend that you do so, because you'll get a better understanding of rightful liberty and the way that our government is abusing our rights. So the Aderholt Amendment, my contention is that I highly doubt that any of our public servants have actually read the Aderholt Amendment, which, if you look at, and again, I know this is getting a little boring, I'm sorry, but Section 201 of H.R. 191 is what this Aderholt Amendment is based upon. What is Section 201? It's 20 memoranda that are being amended by this summary. Well, H.R. 191 is called Repeal Executive Amnesty Act of 2015. So I went and I looked at one of the memorandum that it purports to replace or repeal. I picked number 11 just randomly. Section 11, number 11, is called the Denial of Funds for the Implementation of Unauthorized Actions. Actually, that's Section 201. It's called the Denial of Funds for Implementation of Unauthorized Actions. The memorandum number 11 repeals 5 different pieces of legislation again. So in other words, what we have is layer upon layer upon layer of legislation that amends this section of that act, of this bill, and there is no conceivable way that our public servants are reading the legislation in total to get a contextual understanding of exactly what kind of unconstitutional burdens they are placing on the people. And that's got to stop. My premise of this entire program is voting for a bill without reading it and completely understanding it is a violation of your oath of office. Now, the Democrats are blocking H.R. 240 in the Senate. They're doing the right thing, but for the wrong reason. They're saying that they want a clean bill. I don't know that these people understand what a clean bill ought to look like. It ought to be readable, it ought to be understandable, it ought to be enforceable. We all should be able to pick up a piece of legislation and read it and know what it says. So my contention is an unconstitutional law is no law at all. And of course, again, I don't know about the Department of Homeland Security to begin with. Benjamin Franklin said it nicely when he said those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. So what do we do? Well, I think the time has passed for our public servants to be elected into office and go off to their high places, left to their own devices. Lord Acton said it nicely when he said power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We agree with him. I know firsthand there is a seductive allure to power that no one is immune to. You get to sit at the best table, you get to get the first serving of the best meal, you get people clapping when you walk into a room. That's very seductive, so I completely understand why they're doing what they're doing, but it's got to stop. So my concept is very simple. The Constituent Guidelines for Effective Constitutional Government is a meet, report, but it's coordinated, it's systematic, and it's structured. We're going to utilize the tools that we have at our fingertips in order to hold our public servants accountable to their oath of office. What tools am I speaking of? Well, the internet for one. There's a marketing program called Constant Contact. I've already used it quite effectively. You can send out mass emails without harm of being considered spam. That's important. I'm thinking of setting up web pages, talks, but can he deliver? What does Debbie Dingle do? Checking in on Benechek, what matters to Miller, just clever titles of web pages that we can go through the kinds of issues that these people are focusing on. We can create YouTube clips. I just signed up for a membership at CMN TV. That's a local television station in Troy. I can use their video equipment. I'm taking an editing class next. Once I take that class, I can edit the presentations that I create. It will then air on public access television. Once it airs on public access television, I'm free to use it on YouTube clips, in emails, on Facebook pages, whatever I can do with it. So that's another one of the tools that we want to use, again, to the next level. News talk radio. How many in this room call talk radio? Okay, that's not enough. We need to see all hands, and I would be glad to work with you to teach you how to effectively call into talk radio, make a point, have some backup information ready at hand, and so you'll have a real smooth transition through a call. It's real easy and it's real valuable. Press releases, letters to the editor, I don't think that the print media is as important as it used to be, but what is important is the print media now has online versions, and in each article they have comments afterwards. That would be interesting to start a coordinated campaign to make sure that our conservative Republican message is coming through on these comments, because the Democrats certainly use these tools effectively. We need to start doing that. I think another effective tool is the 2012 Republican Party platform. I love that platform. I think it's wonderful. It's called We Believe in America. An excerpt from the preamble is Jefferson's vision of a wise and frugal government must be restored. We agree. I know that Jennifer Hensley, a lady from Livingston County, has created an organization called Platform Republican Caucus. You might want to go online, consider joining that effort. What her concept is that she's going to hold Republican officials to the Republican Party platform. Sounds simple, but it's got to be done by we the people in order for it to be effective. So what other tools? Well, I'd like to make presentations to state legislators, county commissioners, city councils, executive committees, patriot groups, media groups. And the interesting thing about these groups that I've listed is state legislators really should be the watchdog for our federal legislators. County commissioners should be the watchdogs of the state legislators. City councils should be the watchdogs of county commissioners. You don't think so, Shelley? Is that not true? Don't you agree with that? Well, that's where we have to take the tools to the next level, because I think that, as we have often heard, government at the local level is most effective. Well, that means that we have to go up a little bit higher in each level of authority and make sure that we are holding that group accountable for what we're doing. I put media groups at the end. Quite frankly, they're looking at everything, but they're mucking it up because they're not fair and balanced. They have an agenda. So somehow we've got to correct that. We want to help our legislators feel the heat of being in the kitchen. That's why I have my kitchen tools on this presentation. We have to be armed with knowledge and a digital recorder. Michigan law makes it a crime to use any device to eavesdrop upon a conversation without the consent of all parties. That does sound like an all-party consent law, but an appeals court ruled that the statutory term eavesdrop refers only to the overhearing or recording of the conversation of others. However, the Michigan Supreme Court hasn't yet decided on this question. So we want to inform our public servant that we are recording the meeting as we place the recorder on the table in full view of everyone. We want to activate it right at that point in time. We do know that it's better to be safe than sorry, but you know what? It's best to be free. We don't want you to have to become a legal precedent setter, even though we really need some legal precedent setters. So if you have the time and the money and are willing to volunteer, we'll be happy to put you to use. We could use your help. We want to let our public servants know that we're not going to accept no for an answer, quite frankly. Again, the recorder's already activated at this point, so if they are opposing what you're doing, you're going to have that on the recording. Let them know that you want to record them so that you can protect them against misinterpretation or misrepresentation. And refer to the Michigan law that makes it a crime to eavesdrop. And let them know you're not eavesdropping, you're fulfilling your constitutional duty to your country. So the first meeting. We want to set up our first meeting by looking at the campaign promises of the particular public servant that we're meeting with. Find the broad statements that they make, examples, fix Washington, stop amnesty, I'm never going to raise your taxes. I like that one especially. And so we start out by asking the particular representative, well, how exactly did you plan on fixing Washington? And let them talk. Because what we're doing here is we're building a legislative blueprint. Then we have written guidelines. Now I've created a list of written guidelines with the help of a number of different people. I have them in written form and I have them at the meeting. So I'm basically going through each of the guidelines. I want to go through them with you quickly. The first guideline is to eliminate the healthcare industry exemption to the Sherman and Clayton Antitrust Acts. Did you know that the healthcare industry is exempt from laws that are on the books to protect us against monopolies? That's why they are charging 5 to 10 times the amount that should be charged for our medical needs. If they were forced to follow antitrust laws preventing monopolies and had to abide by free market principles of supply and demand, the prices would come down. We might not even need health care coverage, except in catastrophic instances, of course. There's a really interesting video called Federal Budget Mess in Video Format. On the center table with the statue, I've put a list of useful information, and my website links are attached, or not attached, but they're shown on that document where you can go and take a look at some of these pieces of information that I'm sharing with you today. But that's a very good video. Gives you a good broad understanding of the budget mess. Second item, abolish the Fed. Actually, audit the Fed, abolish the Federal Reserve Bank. Campaign for Liberty is doing some great work in that regard. I would recommend that you go to their website and take a look at some of that information. Pass a congressional bill disallowing any more deficit spending. We have a lot of talk going on right now about balancing the budget. And that's important, but it's only one part of the piece. And it can be a very dangerous piece, because if we force our legislators to balance the budget without having some spending constraints, they will balance the budget only by raising our taxes. That is not good. The better approach would be to pass a congressional bill disallowing any more deficit spending. We have to stay within our means. They should too. Repeal Dodd-Frank. I work in the mortgage industry, and I know that Dodd-Frank legislation is destroying private lending. as we speak. They are nationalizing our financial markets. That's very dangerous, it's very wrong, and we need to repeal it. Secure our borders, that could be number one on the list, quite frankly. We all know that needs to happen. Defund illegal amnesty, oppose net neutrality, internet sales tax. Stay away from our internet. The internet is a great freedom tool for all of us to use, and we don't need government control of the internet. Defund Obamacare. Vigorously defend and support the first 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution. Those are our bedrock freedoms from overpowering government. Derail the National Defense Authorization Act. That is a bill that has a component that gives the president sole discretion, again, to determine who's covered as a terrorist and what their act is that he may deem to be belligerent. If you are deemed to be belligerent as a covered person, you can be arrested and detained without due process or the right to an attorney. That is a fact. That is this legislation. It needs to stop. This kind of overpowering government needs to stop. We should repeal the 17th Amendment, give the power to appoint our senators, our federal senators, back to the state legislatures instead of in the hands of special interests, which is what is happening now when it goes to a vote of the people. I like this one. Apportion the House of Representatives in accordance with Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. In that clause, it says the number of representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000. That's a ratio. Right now, we have 14 federal congressional members. We have almost, from the state of Michigan, from the state of Michigan. We have almost 10 million people in the state of Michigan. That means that every one of our 14 representatives has over 700,000 constituents. Did you ever wonder why your voice isn't being heard? If we went back to the constitutional way of apportioning the House of Representatives, we would have approximately 330 representatives from the great state of Michigan. Now you say, and I agree, do we really want 330 people rushing off to Washington to muck things up? Of course not. But the tools that we have, that we're able to use, they have access to those tools as well. They can stay in their district and they can properly represent the 30,000 or so people who are their constituents. They don't have to go marching off to Washington at every turn. They need to study and understand the enumerated powers of Congress and the duties of all three branches of government. There are checks and balances. If these people don't understand what the proper role of the three branches of government are, how can they possibly be watchdogs for us? They can't. My favorite, read all the bills in their entirety or do not vote in favor of any bill that you have not personally read and fully understand. Now, what this is going to do, if we can force this upon them, is to start getting legislation that is written 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 pages long, that are standalone, that can be understood by even an 8th grader. That's what we should have in this country so that we can all understand what we're doing to ourselves and our children. If a piece of legislation does not meet the following minimum criteria, it should never see the light of day. It has to be understandable as a standalone piece of legislation. It's got to be constitutional, it's got to be enforceable, and it can't pick and choose winners and losers. We have, as I said, 14 representatives. I've got them listed by their district, their name, their party affiliation, phone numbers, committee assignments. They're all listed here. Of those 14, 5 of them are Democrats. What do we do with the Democrats? Well, we have to organize small groups of brave constituents and go into those Democrat districts and, with our constitutional guidelines, teach them about constitutional government. In fact, right now we're working on a meeting with Brenda Lawrence, so that should be fun. Now, Democrats generally agree that they don't like the NDAA. They don't like people being detained without due process or without an attorney. So that may be the sliver of constitutionality that we focus on to try to bend them into conformity. I have a test case that I'm working on. It was with my representative, David Trott. Now, to begin with, I want to tell you I like David Trott. I really do. He's very personal. He seems very intelligent. He seems dedicated. He seems to really want to improve government. In the meeting, that we have recorded. He said the following: government is too big. He expected to support the Audit the Fed bill, and I'm proud to say that he has supported the Audit the Fed legislation. He has grave concerns about Dodd-Frank. He said the Commerce Clause is used far beyond what the Founding Fathers envisioned. He said he'll vote his conscience, be his own person, and if leadership doesn't support him in voting his conscience, he'll then tell them to stay out of Michigan. I like that. He said the president has abused the Constitution, the president has abused executive authority. He's going to be on the House Judiciary Committee, so he gets to vote on articles of impeachment. He said the president must be reined in, amnesty needs to be defunded. He will do what he said he's going to do, but can't guarantee that his one vote will make a difference. At that point, one of our astute constituents said, Representative Trott, we're not asking you to fix all the problems, we just don't want you to become a part of the problem. And he said he's not sure he'd grab a microphone and become a Ted Cruz of the House. We can only hope. He said he'll be a thoughtful, hardworking legislator. I truly believe him. He said he'll be in the district every day that Congress is not in session. I think that'll be a little difficult for him. He said he'll be accessible. I haven't found that to be necessarily true, but I'm not finished. He said he sort of agrees that bills must be read before voting on them. And I say sort of because when I said bills must be read before voting on them, he said, right. And I said, if you don't know what a bill says, you can't vote for it. He said, right. So I kind of took that as agreement, sort of. He expressed concern that after bills are passed, the bureaucrats get to take over. He wants to support legislation that require lawmakers to study unintended consequences. He said he would get back to us after being sworn in regarding Audit the Fed. He didn't really, but he did sign the legislation that's currently in the House, and I appreciate that very much. We want to make absolutely certain that our legislators are following the legislative blueprint that we're building with these interviews. We know that the mainstream media and or the opposing political party would gladly help us hold our public servants accountable for their words and their deeds, especially at election time. Now, I've been told that this is a little bit of a harsh approach, that we need to be respected by our public servants, and I just say, what has respect gotten us for the past 100 years? We've tried that. I like Niccolo Machiavelli's statement that it's better to be feared than to be loved if you can't be both. Thomas Jefferson, have you ever seen a better picture of Thomas Jefferson? I was so tired of looking at old pictures of Thomas Jefferson, so I found a young picture. Thomas Jefferson said once, when the people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. I wonder if Jefferson ever read Machiavelli. I'll bet he did. So what we're trying to do is become citizen lobbyists, and our goal will be to diligently work with our public servants to hold them to their campaign promises and their legislative blueprint. So what do we do with the goods? We are working right now to try to set up a second meeting with Representative Trott. We're trying to set up our first meeting with Brenda Lawrence, so again, it's structured, it's systematic. We also had a first meeting with Representative Bishop, and he agreed to sign the Audit the Fed pledge as well, or the bill, and we appreciate that very much. But again, because our Representative David Trott said the things that he said in our first meeting, I built a list of second questions. First, I have already thanked him deeply for co-sponsoring the Audit the Fed legislation. I want to find out what legislative action he might be taking to repeal Dodd-Frank. I wanted to know if I would like to ask him if he has proposed any actions to rein in the president. I wondered if he's preparing any legislation to impeach the president. I'd like to see that. I'd like to know what he might do to defund amnesty. And I wondered if he's actually reading the bills that are put on his desk. Has he made any concrete suggestions to rein in the bureaucrats? Now, when we go in the second time, we have the same structured, coordinated approach. We have our recorder, and we start asking questions and let him talk. And again, we build the legislative blueprint at that point. Does he have any legislation that addresses the issues of unintended consequences? Then we look at what he does, and we can follow things very easily on the internet. It's just a great tool. He voted for H.R. 30. That's the so-called Save American Workers Act of 2015. Now, in Obamacare, there is a mandate that if an employee works 30 hours or more, the employer is obligated to pay for his health care needs. So what have employers done to try to skirt that they limit their employees' hours to 29. So the Republicans have decided that it would be better to have that limit at 40. And I agree with that, except when you start tweaking legislation, you're legitimizing it. And we will have 100 years of amendments to Obamacare if we allow this to start happening now. Obamacare needs to be repealed in its entirety, and it is not a good idea for our legislators to start tweaking with the legislation. An unconstitutional law is no law at all. I wanted to get specific. I've looked at some committee assignments that Representative Trott has. They're very nice. He's in the House Judiciary Committee on the Subcommittee on Regulatory Reform, Commercial, and Antitrust Law. That's wonderful. He can help to eliminate health care exemptions to the Sherman and Clayton Antitrust Acts. He's on the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Job Creation, and Regulatory Affairs. That's perfect. He can help repeal Dodd-Frank, and I do know that his business is affected by that legislation as well. So I have high hopes for him to work on that issue. He's also on the Subcommittee on National Security. That's wonderful. He can give us legislation to secure our borders. He's on the Subcommittee on Contracting in the Workforce. Perfect. He can work towards defunding illegal amnesty. And he's on a Subcommittee on Investigations, Oversight, and Regulations. And again, that's perfect because he can work on auditing the Fed. So my question is, what will Representative Trott do on a personal level in each of these committees to fix Washington? Because that was his campaign pledge. I have to have an action tracker to be able to keep the coordination of the program. I have 2 stars here because I was very pleased. On the 13th of January, Representative Trott spoke on the House floor in support of legislation to reform federal rulemaking. I want to thank him for that. On February 10th, he endorsed Audit the Fed H.R. 24. I already have thanked him for that. What I see as the bad, he voted for Speaker Boehner, and it's not so much that that's bad in and of itself, but I want to question him because a few of the members in our first meeting specifically asked him about Speaker Boehner, and that we were concerned because he's not conservative. And Representative Trott didn't say anything. At that point, I think it might have been really nice if he would have said, well, you know what, I'm considering supporting him, and I'll tell you why. I would have felt real comfortable with that, to have a little dialogue going on. But he also said he'd get back to us. He never did. That's not, you know, I can understand he's new, he's a freshman, he's got a lot of responsibility. Now the good, or so he thought, he probably thought he was doing good by voting for the House version of the spending bill to fund the Department of Homeland Security with the Adderholt Amendment. The bad, he voted for the spending bill to fund the Department of Homeland Security. Voting for a bill that you haven't read is a violation of your oath of office. He made a Facebook post on January 16. Today is Religious Freedom Day. Religious liberty is a cornerstone of our American democracy and is enshrined in our Constitution. That's a nice thought, but note to Trott, this is not a democracy. This is a republic. I want to make sure that he understands that important distinction. There's a YouTube clip called Republic versus Democracy that starts out with a picture of Benjamin Franklin. I highly recommend that everybody watch it. It gives a real clear understanding of the important difference between a republic and a democracy, and I want to ask Representative Trott to watch that. He put a Facebook post up on February 5th, Washington's costly regulations are killing jobs. I voted today to reduce those ineffective and inefficient federal rules and help create more jobs in Southeast Michigan and throughout the nation. That is good. The bad, did he read the bill? The bill he's referring to is called H.R. 527, Small Business Regulatory Flexibility Improvement Acts of 2015. I started to read this piece of legislation. It's 31 pages long. I only got through 4 pages, and I couldn't stand to read it anymore. It is, again, the amendments to paragraph 2 of section 601 of 8 Title 5 U.S.C., subsection C of section 603 of Title 5 U.S.C. I mean, it just goes on and on, like it doesn't really say anything. It just refers back to all these amendments. It references or redefines Section 6 of 21, the Forest and Rangeland Renewable Resources Planning Act of 1974. Now, if you're going to vote in favor of a piece of legislation that redefines a previous piece of legislation, it is incumbent upon you to understand and read the underlying legislation, because otherwise you won't know what kind of unconstitutional burdens you're placing on the people. But then what good is reading the bill if it's 1,000 pages and you don't have 2 days and 2 lawyers to find out what it means after you've read the bill? Those are famous words said by our Representative John Conyers at the National Press Club, July 2nd of 2009. I agree with him. That's why we need to change the way our laws are written. I sent an email to Representative Trott. I doubt that he actually saw it, but again, I reiterated, please read every piece of legislation that is put on your desk, or do not vote in favor of it, because the devil is always in the details. Again, I'm going to keep pounding that. I think that is so important, and tying it to the oath of office. I will be eternally vigilant. I hope that I'll have a lot of people join my effort. We need to stay in contact. I've listed some of the staff members of Representative Trott, and they're all really nice people. So, maybe we can get a good working relationship with them. That would be my hope. I will never give up. I think Ronald Reagan put it best when he said, when you can't make them see the light, make them feel the heat. Now, Mother Teresa also said a wonderful thing. She said, we ourselves feel that what we are doing is just a drop in the ocean, but if the drop was not in the ocean, I think the ocean would be less because of the missing drop. I like that so much. That's so encouraging. Speaking of missing, we have a page called Missing in Action in our action plan. Right now, Representative Trott is missing in action because although he promised to meet with us again, he never has. Another page is called Lost and Found. Representative Mike Bishop has found himself on the Lost and Found page. He used to be on the Missing in Action page, but it took more than 17 phone calls to get him to meet with his constituents. I'm just hoping that second meeting is handled a little bit better. Again, my program is systematic, it's coordinated, and it's structured. I need people to join in to help out. We have a lot of tasks that need to be done: research, writing, web page construction, phone calls, and the meetings that we have with the representatives. The famous Nazi resistor Dietrich Bonhoeffer put it nicely when he said, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. I would hope that you'll join us. And that's my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you. Are there any questions? Questions? You like that? Thank you. Make me have to pull out my old lady glasses.
No, I think I got this.
Oh, okay, sure.
Okay. The federal government has the ability to put anything into a bill, not so in Lansing. Perhaps you should put that on your list.
I'm not sure I understand the question. The federal government has the ability to put anything into a bill that's not so in Lansing. If that's not so in Lansing, then I applaud Lansing, because putting anything in a bill really is dangerous to the freedom of the people. We need standalone legislation that we can understand that focuses on one thing and one thing alone. That's the way I would answer that.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Why not give them a quiz compulsory before they vote for the bill?
That is so interesting. You know, a couple years ago, I started a project that really kind of took off like a lead balloon, but it was really a good project. It's called PA1, Constitutional Compliance. And what it said is that you and I have to be licensed to cut hair. We have to be licensed to fix nails. We have to be licensed to write a mortgage, and we have to have continuing education classes, and we have to be up on our legislation. And we elect people to legislate for our freedom, and they don't have to take any kind of test as to whether or not they understand the Constitution that they are swearing an oath to protect and defend. Now, thank you. I sent copies of that particular, I called it Public Act 1. I wanted to get it on a ballot. And there's only two ways to get, and at the state level. I'm very much a states' rights person. That was at the state level that particular piece of legislation, if you will, was meant to be. And I know that there's only two ways to get something into law, and that is either the legislators agree or a vote of the people. Well, a petition across the state of Michigan to get something on a ballot would be very expensive, and I didn't have any funds to do that, so I sent a copy of that piece of legislation to every single legislator in the state of Michigan, every single elected official, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, all the state legislators, and no one wanted to touch it, not even Tom McMillan. He did meet with me, and he said, this is too harsh. So I didn't have any resources to continue that, but I still think it's a very good idea that our legislators be quizzed on their knowledge of the Constitution that they are supposed to be protecting.
Do all bills offered in either house have summaries to accompany them?
I think they do. I'm not a legislator. I've never been a legislator, but I go online a lot and try to research various issues, and I always see a summary. In fact, every ballot proposal that is put on our ballot for us to vote upon, which is more important even still, is just a summary. And it doesn't give you the full flavor unless you take the time to go and read the legislation. And oftentimes, it's just a flowery presentation to try to encourage you to vote in favor of something. But if you actually read the details, you don't like what you see in it.
You speak of we in your group. How many are in this group, and how do you join the we?
Well, we decided I keep saying we, because I think it's a better word. I don't like the I, me stuff. I really want to be inclusive. Actually, we had 6 people in the constituent meeting. I've given this presentation to groups of 40 and maybe 30 people, and I've gotten maybe 12, 15 people to sign on to it. So in addition to the 6, so we're working on a small group, 20 people, but I'm convinced that if we go to meet our legislators with too many people, they'll turn us away. And if we go with too few people, they'll ignore us. So we have to have that right mix. And I think 5 or 6 people in a meeting with a public servant is a very good number, because you have an opportunity to control the meeting nicely. Now, I would like to see everybody, all of we the people, join in the project. So you're welcome to sign up. There's a sign-up sheet on the table.
Thank you. Thank you, Janice.
You're welcome.
That's it?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.